An aircraft designed during the Cold War has somehow become the centerpiece of a modern strike. The incredible part is, it was never built to do this. The Su-24M Fencer. What happened to this aircraft that, nearly half a century later, it is still dangerous? March 10th, 2026. Somewhere over western Russia, cruise missiles descend on the city of Bryansk, flying low, flying fast. They strike the Kremny L microelectronics plant, Russia's second largest producer of chips for military systems. Components made here end up inside Iskander missile guidance and military radar. 5 direct strikes on the main production building. The main workshop erupts in a series of explosions captured by local phones. Local residents report a large fire spreading across the industrial complex. Satellite images taken the next day show the roof torn open, the interior burning. Analysts assess the factory may be finished. Drones had hit this plant before. Even a 6-drone raid only shut production down temporarily. This time was different. This time the weapons were Storm Shadow, and they were launched by a 50-year-old Soviet bomber the Kremlin had every reason to believe was already obsolete. But no such aircraft should have been able to do what it just did. To understand how any of this became possible, rewind 3 years to the mission that first proved it could be done. September 22nd, 2023. Western Ukraine, before dawn. 2 crew members walk toward a shape on the darkened flight line, their boots crunching on the concrete. The Sukhoi Su-24M sits low ahead of them, wings folded back, missiles hanging heavy under the intersections. Ladder up, canopy open. They climb in side by side. Pilot on the left, weapons systems officer on the right, in a cockpit just 1.65 meters across. Close enough to touch shoulders, close enough to hear each other breathe through the intercom. The destination was Sevastopol. The weapon was Storm Shadow. The mission was Crab Trap. Everything in between stayed secret. But the aircraft, the defenses, and the technology leave enough clues to trace how a mission like this could unfold. Engines light. 2 Lyulka turbojets spool up behind the crew, their vibration carrying through the seat frames as the Fencer rolls forward, past the ground crew, onto the runway. Taxi lights click off. External lights die. Only the panel glow remains inside the cockpit now. And in that panel glow, the strange shapes under the wings finally become visible. 2 Storm Shadow cruise missiles, 5 meters long and over a ton each, ride on pylons that were never built for this aircraft. Those pylons were stripped from British Panavia Tornadoes, retired years ago, and adapted to hang under a Soviet bomber. British hardware bolted onto a Soviet airframe, carrying an Anglo-French weapon into what should have been an impossible mission. The first piece of the Frankenstein. Throttle forward, engines climbing into afterburner. The bomber accelerates down the runway with wings spread to 16 degrees to claw every gram of lift from an airframe carrying weapons its designers never imagined. Airspeed climbs, rotation, gear up. The airfield falls away beneath them, and the wings begin folding back. 16 degrees becoming 35 for cruise, the airframe reshaping itself around the change in mission. Sukhoi built the Fencer with wings that change shape mid-flight. The same brutal problem America solved with the F-111 Aardvark. Lift heavy, cruise far, then disappear low. Ahead, Crimea. The threat display begins to populate. Contacts blooming across the screen, one after another. S-300, S-400, Pantsir, fighter patrols, electronic warfare stations, a defensive web designed specifically to kill large, non-stealthy aircraft before they get anywhere near weapon release range. And each icon on the display is a battery that has been waiting for a moment exactly like this one. For weeks, Ukraine has been punching holes in it. Somewhere on the Western Cape, an S-400 has already burned. Radars have been struck, coastal sites destroyed. But damaged is not dead, not even close. Somewhere ahead, even one surviving battery is enough to end this mission and everyone inside the cockpit. Then, on the threat display, a radar flashes into view. Somewhere ahead, a decoy has pulled it out of hiding, and an anti-radiation missile is already moving toward the emission. Then another contact appears. Then another. The network is reacting, and for a few minutes, that reaction creates exactly what the fencer needs: confusion. A gap opens in the coverage. The fencer keeps moving. The nose drops, ridge lines rising into the windscreen, closer than they should be, then closer still. The terrain following radar takes over, reading the ground ahead and correcting altitude without the pilot touching the stick, guiding the aircraft through valleys that open beneath them and over ridges that climb, roll past, and drop away behind. Trees blur beneath the fuselage. This is the work the fencer was born for. Fast, low, under the horizon. Sukhoi designed it to slip beneath enemy radar half a century ago, and half a century later, the same instinct helps it survive against weapons descended from the very systems it was built to evade. But staying low only buys time. Somewhere ahead, the aircraft has to expose itself long enough to fire. The weapons officer runs the final check. Coordinates locked. Release authority armed. And here comes the strangest problem in the entire mission. The Su-24 cannot guide Storm Shadow. It was never designed to. There is no data link between the aircraft's Soviet-era avionics and the British missile hanging under its wing. No shared electronic language between them. No way for the bomber to correct the missile's flight or update its target after release. It does not have to. The missile was loaded on the ground hours ago with its own coordinates, its own inertial navigation, its own GPS. Its guidance was never meant to talk to the airplane in the first place. Give it power, target data, and a safe release signal, and the old bomber does not need to understand a thing about what happens next. The missile flies itself all the way in. Release. A storm shadow drops from the pylon and its turbojet ignites, the missile pulling away in a shallow arc toward the coast, wings unfolding, engine gathering speed. Seconds later, another follows from the strike package. Hard bank, course reversed, home. The attack is over. Getting home is not. The bomber runs low, wings swept back, pylons empty. Nothing left to fight with, no teeth. On the threat display, a radar contact appears, then another, then another. Every system that survived the first wave is awake now, searching, recalibrating, and the corridor that opened an hour ago is closing behind them one battery at a time. A dish sweeps past their position, holds, sweeps again. On the screen, a second contact blooms, then a third, the network beginning to reconstruct itself around the hole the fencer flew through. One battery missed by the suppression, one radar dish that survived and swung back to search. That's all it takes to end this mission. The fencer stays low, weaving through the same terrain that hit it on the way in, ridgelines rising and falling and rising again. Speed and terrain, That's all the crew has now. Both hands on the stick, eyes on the threat display, eyes on the ground. Nowhere left to hide but under the horizon. The weapons officer watches the screen. The pilot watches the terrain. Neither speaks. The only thing left to do is fly. Then Sevastopol shakes. The upper floors of the Black Sea Fleet headquarters erupt while senior officers are still inside. Roof sections collapse inward, windows blow outward across the courtyard, and fire tears through a structure that has served as the fleet's nerve center since 1958. Residents cited by Ukrainian media report multiple explosions around 1 in the afternoon. A large number of ambulances are dispatched to the scene. Satellite imagery taken in the following days confirms the scale of the damage. Russia acknowledged the strike. 1 service member missing. Ukraine's intelligence chief reported at least 9 killed and 16 wounded, including 2 generals. The Special Operations Forces published a higher toll, 34 officers dead, over 100 wounded. None of these figures have been independently verified. What no one disputes, the building burned. The fleet's command structure took a blow that forced immediate operational changes, and the weapon was delivered by a Soviet-era bomber designed decades before this war began. A Soviet airframe whose design bloodline first flew when Brezhnev ran the Kremlin. An Anglo-French cruise missile built for conflicts that never came. Pylons adapted from Britain's retired Tornado. And a Ukrainian crew who made the whole patchwork work as one. No engineer at Sukhoi or MBDA ever imagined their work would share a mission card. 2 people in a cockpit 5 feet wide proved them wrong. The headquarters strike did not end the Black Sea Fleet, but it became one blow in a sustained campaign of storm shadow strikes against warships, submarines, and naval infrastructure that crippled vessels, sank landing craft, and eventually made the fleet's historic Crimean home too dangerous to hold. By early 2024, Russia had relocated the bulk of its Black Sea Fleet hundreds of kilometers east. The port that had served as the fleet's home for generations was no longer safe enough for its own warships. The Fencer was never the whole weapon. Storm Shadow gave it reach, intelligence gave it timing, suppression gave it a corridor. Remove any one of those pieces and the Frankenstein falls apart, and the Fencer is dying. Production ended in 1993.
Roughly 1,400 were built across all variants, but Ukraine's fleet has shrunk steadily through 3 years of war. Combat damage, crashes, the slow erosion of airframes that have not seen a factory floor in decades. Each one lost is permanent. None of Ukraine's allies has a reserve fleet to offer. No production line exists to restart. France's Mirage 2000 may eventually shoulder part of the standoff mission, but until that transition is complete, the oldest bomber in Ukraine's inventory remains one of its hardest strike platforms to replace. Yet in March 2026, a Fencer still took off, still carried Storm Shadow under its wings, still hit a target deep inside Russia that repeated drone attacks had failed to keep offline. 3 years after Crab Trap, the Frankenstein formula still works. The Soviet Union disappeared 35 years ago. Britain retired its Tornadoes years ago. Su-24 production shut down in 1993 and never reopened. But this past March, a Fencer still lifted off with Storm Shadow under its wings, sent missiles deep into Russian territory, and struck a factory producing electronics used inside Russian missiles and military radars. Perhaps the question is not how old a weapon is, or where it was built. It is whether anyone has yet finished imagining everything it can still do. Share this with someone who still thinks the newest weapon is always the most dangerous. Because sometimes, the real story isn't what engineers build next. It's what people discover they can still do with what already exists. And if this changed the way you look at old military machines, subscribe. There are plenty more forgotten aircraft with stories that are far from over.